Welcome to Business Connection. I'm Liz Spencer. We have a wonderful guest in studio. It's Zachary Michael Jack. He's the author of Wish You Were Here, Love and Longing in an American Heartland.
Yeah, so this is the story of my family, and we're a rural Midwest, small town Midwest family, and it's really about love of home, and love of home place, and all the difficult decisions a family makes over the years to stay, and also the almost surreal set of circumstances by which families manage to kind of survive and thrive in a place in which they're rooted over generations.
And you are what, the seventh generation?
That's right, seventh generation.
That's lived on this farm, and it's really rural America. When we're saying rural America, it's farmland.
Yes, yeah, at its height it was 500 acres of farmland, and it's in rural eastern Iowa. And, the nearest town, it's kind of a classic situation where the nearest farm market town is about 5 miles away or so.
Okay. What do you think there is a resurgence or a greater interest in family history and books that tell a family story?
I do. I grew up in the Star Wars era, right? And I just watched the latest Star Wars film in the theaters here. And, it's interesting that myth and even those Star Wars movies often they begin in the home place. And they begin with family, because that's really everyone's most visceral connection and origin. And I think that as the world gets bigger and more mobile and less centered in some ways, that...
Especially to a physical place. We're centered, but we're on the social media, but this is a physical place.
Exactly right. And with a physical place and your connections to that physical place come all those emotional memories and connections and pathways too.
I think it's interesting. Do you think that everybody has a story, a family story?
Yeah, absolutely. I think everyone's family story is sort of equal, really. Within families, those stories are often told with great relish, and with great sort of happiness and joy. And I think that a book like this, one of the things that it does is it sort of shows a way by which those stories that are intimate to us and near to us can find resonance and relevance to a wider reading public.
Right. Well, I think because we all have family stories, I think when we see something like this and we think, wow, this is just, it's so familiar, yet it's so interesting, yet it's so new, because it's not my family, it's your family.
Right.
But there's some joy there. Tell me a little bit about what you might have discovered, or some sweet story that's in this book that I can look forward to.
Right. So a lot of these are kind of love stories of various kinds. Now, these are essays. This is nonfiction. But at root, it's a story of how one loves a place, a people, and a family. And so one of the stories I tell is my grandparents' love story. And for all of us, I think I call them golden oldies, right? Our parents, our grandparents, often their love and how they met one another looms very large, in our psyche, and we kind of measure ourselves against it in some way. And also their love of their home place, right, which is a romance that sometimes we who come after don't feel like we've ever quite achieved that degree of romance or love. So one of the things that happened in the course of researching and writing this book, which I did from a lot of family artifacts, was I found my grandmother's lists of pros and cons for the various suitors that were courting her favor in the 1930s, and it's a surreal experience to come upon the list of your grandfather's, the man who was to become your grandfather's pros and cons, and to see things in there that are now you can laugh at it, but they were things like bad speller, for example, or my grandfather had a broken nose from the time he was very young, and so broken nose, and good qualities like good manager of money, good farmer, these sorts of things. But it's fascinating to see that pro and con list all these many years ago, because of course, as we all know, love is irrational and illogical, and the list for your lover their cons might outweigh their pros. but that doesn't mean that you still don't love them with every fiber of your being.
Right, because there's that extra special something that love brings.
Exactly, the intangibles.
Right, that go beyond the pros and the cons. And I think this is so sweet. And this book kind of really champions to me the rural heartland versus, say, the metropolitan. Why is that important?
I think the rural heartland, Illinois, Iowa, Missouri, Minnesota, Nebraska, Kansas, that kind of classic Midwest, really gets neglected. A lot of the stories that come out of the rural heartland are often tragedy stories of one kind or another. They're the poor economics, or they're a storm tragedy. But there are so many important, redeeming, sweet, meaningful stories that come out of my hometown and all the hometowns like it, across the region. And those are some of the stories that I wanted to tell. And also, in telling them, to remind folks that this is still a viable choice, that the reason that your grandparents or your great-grandparents chose these places, the economic landscape may have changed a little bit, but there's still places where you can live, where you can practice your business, where you can put down roots or regrow roots, and they're wide open for all of those that new generation of pioneers.
And you're exactly in that age group that might be leaving of rural America right now. So this is really a book to that group to say, stay put.
It is, or find a way to stay. I think sometimes I hear this all the time because. I obviously travel a lot for teaching and for books and so forth, but I still live on the farm, so I've made a very difficult choice, professionally and otherwise, to maintain those roots. Now, I had roots to go back to, and they're 7 generations deep, and not everyone has that. So to me, it's really about, some people grow up in the city, on the south side of Chicago, say, or in Milwaukee, and for some reason that they can't explain, they have a fascination with rural and small town living. And one of the reasons I wrote this book is to remind them that you can follow your dreams to rural and small town Midwest just as easily as you can follow them to Chicago or Minneapolis or Kansas City or Des Moines. And I think that, again, it takes sort of a new spirit of pioneering from young people. And then there are plenty of older folks still in these places who privately, very earnestly and fervently wish that a younger generation would come back and give it a try. And especially, I think, when people, we all have heard in the Midwest about brain drain. And there's some new scholarship out there now that talks about brain gain. And in some Midwestern counties, there's folks who, particularly in their mid-30s to mid-40s, are experiencing a net gain of that demographic because they've established themselves somewhat economically, and they're coming back to raise families. So that's a nice trend that this book talks about.
They're going back to the heartland.
Yeah, exactly. Right. In many ways, so many things in life are circles. And, the classic Midwestern narrative is that young people leave and they settle in a city or a suburb, and often then that they start families there and they start new roots there and never look back. But my experience has been that even if that's the case, they always look back. They always look back. And that it takes us, when you reach a certain age, that look back, becomes more meaningful. And you may not be able to physically move back, but that doesn't mean that your psyche and your heart, and your intellect and your memories don't travel back wherever you're living.
I think it sounds like a wonderful story, or a collection of stories and narratives, because it's a nonfiction that I think we can all relate to, because it's about the heartland, love, and family. Thanks for stopping by and telling us a little bit about it. It was wonderful to talk to you.
Of course, my pleasure.
We'll be right back with more Business Connections. Stay tuned.